DMAX and Gigantamax Pokemon have been in Pokémon GO for roughly a year now, and I've received tons of requests to cover the best ones worth powering up. This video is going to specifically highlight the best Gigantamax Pokemon you should invest into, but if you are curious about the best Dynamax Pokemon, then you should watch this video right here. That video is going to dive deeper into the fundamentals of the max battle system, so if you are a new or returning player, I would strongly encourage you guys to watch that video first to get a better understanding of how things actually work. Otherwise, I'm going to quickly cover some important Gigantamax fundamentals and then we'll dive straight into the featured Pokemon. So first up, we have Gigantamax versus Dynamax, right, in terms of max attack. It's a little bit complicated when it comes down to factoring the calculations here in terms of power potential, but in simple terms, basically for Dynamax attackers, at level 1 they're going to do 250 damage, level 2 300, and then finally level 3 350. Now when it comes down to Gigantamax attackers, they're going to have a higher attack from level 1. That's going to be 350, level 2 is going to be 400, and level 3 is going to be 450. Now in most scenarios, Gigantamax attackers are going to be more powerful, but there are going to be some situations, like for example when we have Dynamax legendary Pokemon, where they are actually going to be more powerful because we have to factor in their base stats plus the IVs, and typically their attack stats are much higher. One really good example that I talked about in my other video was Dynamax Moltres versus Gigantamax Corviknight. Even though Gigantamax Corviknight is going to get that GMAX boost, because Moltres has such a high attack stat, that is still going to be the better flying type attacker to use in max battles. Now with that being said, in the future when we get access to new Dynamax legendary Pokemon, they might be more powerful than some of the Gigantamax attackers that we do currently have. And of course, I will make sure to update this list in the future as well to cover all that stuff, but as of right now, most of the time, GMAX attackers are going to be what you want to focus on, and we'll go over the best ones that are actually worth powering up in just a second here. The next fundamental I want to go over is during the initial phase in max battles, because you essentially want to focus on filling up that max meter as soon as possible, right? So you ideally want to use a 0.5 second fast move and avoid using any charge moves. Once the max meter is filled up and you enter into the Dynamax phase, the fast move typing of your Pokemon is going to reflect the same one if it is a Dynamax variant. That being said though, Gigantamax Pokemon are going to have a set move during the max phase regardless of the typing of its fast move. This is why you want something like Dragon Breath on your GMAX Charizard to charge up the max meter during the initial phase, and then during the max phase, even though that was a Dragon type fast move, it's still going to end up using a Fire type moveset, GMAX Wildfire. Now finally, let's talk about powering up and unlocking max moves, and which order you should actually do it in. So first of all, if you have a good IV spread that you got for max battles, just use that. And if you didn't get a good IV spread, then ideally you should try and get a lucky variant. This is going to cost you half the normal amount of Stardust to power it up, and either way the cost should be pretty minimal here. You're only going to want to power it up to around level 30 at first, which is 75,000 Stardust and 66 candy, or 37,500 Stardust if it's actually a lucky variant. Now after you've done that, you can then focus on upgrading the max moves that it actually needs. For example, most attackers are just going to want max attack, so then you can upgrade that to level 3. Now after you've done this, you can then decide if you want to power up the Pokemon further to like level 35, level 40, or even level 50 if it is super good. Now for reference here, all of my Gigantamax attackers are currently sitting at level 30 and they get the job done with max attack 3. That is more than enough. You really don't have to take them further if you don't want to. The power difference is kind of minimal, and I can see how it might be a little bit more important if you are focused on solos or duos, but if you're going to be raiding in big lobbies, this really isn't that big of a deal. But of course, if you do happen to get the hundo or like a super good IV spread, yeah, I'd probably take it further, especially if it is a Pokemon like Charizard or Gengar, which also have relevance in the raid/gym meta with their Mega Evolutions. Yeah, you're going to want to power that thing up to level 40, maybe even level 50 over time. That pretty much covers all the important fundamentals I wanted to go over for Gigantamax Pokemon. If you guys do have any additional questions, let me know in the comment section down below, but now let's take a look at our featured Pokemon. Now like I mentioned earlier, you want to focus on a 0.5 second fast move for these GMAX Pokemon, which is why a lot of the recommendations I'm going to make here are not going to be the same typing as that Pokemon. For example, GMAX Cinderace is going to have Tackle, that's going to be a normal type fast move instead of a Fire type fast move. GMAX Charizard is going to want to have Dragon Breath as a fast move because that's going to be a 0.5 second fast move. But anyways, let's talk about this for a second now. So GMAX Cinderace versus GMAX Charizard. Are they both worth building? Should you focus on one over the other? So I know for a fact right now we don't have GMAX Shiny Cinderace, and that can definitely be something that puts people off from doing more of those. But on paper here, GMAX Cinderace is the best Fire type attacker you can use currently in the max battle system. GMAX Charizard is still very good though, so I mean if you want to focus on GMAX Charizard and potentially try and get that shiny GMAX Charizard, that could be really good to use as well. Now I do feel like I have to mention this, Dragon Breath is going to be a legacy fast move on Charizard, so that means that you have to use an elite fast team if you want to get it. Next up, let's talk about our grass type. So we have GMAX Rillaboom and GMAX Venusaur, pretty much the same thing here. For GMAX Rillaboom, you want to have Scratch, and then for GMAX Venusaur, you want to have Vine Whip. Both are going to be 0.5 second fast moves, neither are going to be legacy movesets, so it's pretty good. Now, I will say the difference between GMAX Venusaur and Rillaboom is going to be their typing. GMAX Rillaboom as a pure attacker is going to be much better than Venusaur, but Venusaur also has the dual typing of Grass and Poison, which in certain scenarios could be better for tanking purposes. That being said though, we have Blissey, we have Zamazenta, we don't really need to worry about using these Pokemon as tanks. Their main usability should be as attackers. At least that's pretty much my takeaway from doing all this stuff the past year. Next up, let's talk about our water-type Pokemon. So we have 3 different options here. We have GMAX Inteleon, GMAX Kingler, and GMAX Blastoise. For GMAX Inteleon, you want to have Water Gun. For GMAX Kingler, you can either have Metal Claw or Mud Shot. Mud Shot is going to be a Legacy Fast move, so you will have to use an Elite Fast TM for that one. And then for GMAX Blastoise, you can go with Water Gun or Bite. So by now you should have a good idea that the Galar starters are going to be the most powerful here. So GMAX Inteleon is no exception to that. It is going to be the best water type you can use in this system right now. Following that, we are going to have GMAX Kingler, and then finally we have access to GMAX Blastoise, which is a bit tankier compared to the other two. But if we're just focusing on using these Pokemon as attackers, that really doesn't make that much of a difference, so you do want to focus on GMAX Inteleon if you can. So between those 3 typings, we have a few different options to go over, but for the rest of the typings that we're going to talk about, we don't actually have different Pokemon to compare them to. I mean, technically we have some Dynamax legendary Pokemon we could compare them to, but for the most part, actually in every single scenario here, they are going to be the best of the best. So with that being said, the next Pokemon we're going to talk about is going to be GMAX Toxtricity with Spark. So GMAX Toxtricity is a pretty rare Pokemon to encounter, I would say. The only way to really get them is from the Gigantamax raids, and then if you can't get them that way, I think there's also the Dynamax raids too, but you know, why would you do those if you can do the Gigantamax raids? And then we have hatching Toxel from eggs. Now, this candy is quite difficult to get. Like, hatching Toxel is not something that's pretty common in my opinion. So if you do happen to build up the candy, especially the XL candy, you definitely want to invest that into a good Toxtricity. So it's probably going to take you some time to work your way up to max attack level 3, but it is definitely worth it. Electric-type Pokemon are some of the more utilized Pokemon because we have so many flying types in the Dynamax system right now, so it definitely is going to be used quite a bit. Next up, we're going to talk about the most utilized GMAX Pokemon, and that's going to be GMAX Gengar with Shadow Claw. So this is by far one of the best Pokemon you guys can use because Ghost-type Pokemon hit practically everything. It's like one of the best generalist attackers because of that. The only typing that it doesn't really hit against is going to be normal types. So if you're doing like a GMAX Snorlax raid, don't use GMAX Gengar for obvious reasons, but you can use something like GMAX Machamp, which we'll talk about after. But overall, GMAX Gengar is super good. There's like tons of Pokemon that are going to be weak to Ghost-type moves. Even for the Pokemon that aren't weak to Ghost-type moves, it's a great generalist, right? Because Ghost-type moves are going to hit most Pokemon. So if we ever get GMAX Gengar back into rotation, just know this should definitely be a top priority for you. Also, shiny GMAX Gengar looks really sick. Now the next Pokemon we're going to talk about is the only one that doesn't actually have a 0.5 second fast move, and that's going to be GMAX Machamp with Counter. This really isn't going to be that big of an issue in my opinion because most of the time you're just going to swap into it during the Dynamax phase and then you're just going to use the GMAX Fighting type moveset, so that should be fine. I mean, we might end up getting like a 0.5 second fast move on Machamp at some point in the future, but as of right now it's going to be a 1 second fast move, so a little bit slower than everything else. Even when we do get access to GMAX Urshifu, I don't believe that's going to be as good. Actually, it shouldn't be that good because it's going to take on a dark type or a water type moveset depending on the style it has. So when it comes down to most of these Pokemon that I have been talking about, power creeps are kind of far away, and the only time we're really going to see them is when we get access to certain legendary Pokemon in this system. Now finally, our last Pokemon that we're going to talk about is going to be GMAX Lapras with either Psy-Wave or Water Gun. Now GMAX Lapras is the best Ice type you can use and probably one of the only Ice type Pokemon that we do have in this system. Now at the time of making this video, we have a total of 13 Gigantamax Pokemon available in Pokemon GO, and if you notice, we only went over 11, so what are the other 2 that are actually not worth powering up? So the first one is going to be GMAX Butterfree with Bug Bite. Now technically you could power this up and use it as a bug type attacker, but there's currently no usability for that, so I mean, if you happen to get one, I would just keep it on the side. Maybe you might use it in the future, maybe you could build it if you really feel like it, but for the most part, there's just going to be way better Pokemon that are worth using compared to GMAX Butterfree. And the other Pokemon is going to be GMAX Snorlax with Lick. So we talked about Dynamax Blissey in my other video. Basically, Snorlax is just a worse version of Blissey because you would ideally want to use that as a tank Pokemon. It's a normal type Pokemon, right? So you're not going to use it as an attacker. When it comes down to Snorlax versus Blissey, they practically have the same stats. The only difference is that Blissey has like 200 more HP, so you might as well go with that. So with that being said, that pretty much covers the best Gigantamax Pokemon worth powering up in Pokemon GO currently. We do still have a lot of unreleased Gigantamax Pokemon, so I'm going to go over those really quickly now before we end off the video. So as far as the Pokemon that we have in-game but just don't have Gigantamax forms, We have Pikachu, Meowth, Eevee, Garbodor, Melmetal, Corviknight, Flapple, Appletun, Centiskorch, Hatterene, and Urshifu in single and rapid style. Now as far as the Pokemon that we don't have in game whatsoever, we have Orbeetle, Dreadnought, Colossal, Sandaconda, Grimmsnarl, which I'm looking forward to, Alcremie, Copperajah, and Duraludon. So when it comes down to those last few Pokemon, it is unlikely that we will see them anytime soon, because we're probably going to get their regular Dynamax variants and their base stage forms first, before we get access to the GMAX forms. That's pretty much the pattern that it has been following ever since we started getting GMAX Pokemon in game. We get the Dynamax variant in their base stage form, and then, they kind of want you to focus on that. Then they drop the GMAX Pokemon, and then it's like, why did I focus on the Dynamax Pokemon? So if you haven't watched my other video, I talk about that as well. It's really not worth investing into any Pokemon that has a GMAX variant as a Dynamax. There are going to be very few exceptions to that in where you would want to do it, but in most scenarios it's probably not going to make sense. So we'll definitely spend some more time talking about these GMAX Pokemon as they get released in the future, but as of right now, that pretty much covers everything I wanted to go over. So if you guys do want to check out some more content in the meantime, I'm going to recommend these two videos next.